Yeah, is it?
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm going to call to order the March 20th meeting for the Connecticut Data Analysis Technology Advisory Board. We're meeting here 9 a.m. In hybrid fashion. So some of us are here in 2D at the Legislative Office Building, and some of us are online. Thank you to everybody who made time for this, and thank you particularly to Murray, who was newly handed this responsibility a few days ago and has done a wonderful job getting us set up. I'm going to begin just going through the membership so folks can indicate if they're here or not. And we have one new member who I'm hoping can introduce herself briefly when we get to her slot. So I'm going to go down the list from the appointing authorities and just let us know if you're here. So from Representative Ritter, we have both Thad Dimkowski and Seth Klaskin.
Here.
Thad is here. I didn't see Seth. Okay. No Seth. From Senator Looney, Michelle Reardon-Old and Adler Coffey.
Here.
Present.
Wonderful. From Representative Candelora, Bree Berner.
I am here.
C is here. And then we still have one open seat from Representative Candelora and 2 seats open from Senator Harding. And once those are filled, we'll have a full slate of the voting members, which will be an exciting new frontier for us. From the non-voting ex officio members from Department of Administrative Services, Dave Labadia. I don't know if you're here. No. From the FOI Commission, Colleen Murphy. I saw Nick on the meeting. Colleen is not here. I know Nick Smart from FOIC. Are you here in her stead or just attending? Oh. All right, hearing nothing. We'll continue from the Attorney General's office. John Newman.
Here.
Great, thanks, John. From the Chief Court Administrator, Judicial Branch, Joe Grealish.
Hey, Scott, I'm here.
Thanks, Joe. State Librarian is seated to my right.
Good morning, everyone.
From the State Treasurer's Office, Christopher Regan.
Good morning.
And our new member, I believe the first time, from the Secretary of the State's Office, Jennifer Barahona. as a new designee, Jennifer, do you want to say hi and introduce yourself, tell your colleagues on the board a little bit about your background and your role?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Jennifer Barahona, Deputy Secretary of the State. As Scott mentioned, I've been in my role about 2.5 months now, so really happy to be here. Scott and I had the opportunity to have a conversation about a month ago about the great work that this board has been doing. I know some familiar faces, Adler, Michelle, from my previous life as a nonprofit executive. I've spent my 30-year career in nonprofit management in Connecticut, mostly Fairfield County, and most recently with Norwalk Acts, heavy data partners in the Norwalk area with Scott and others that are on this call. And so big believer in data, and happy to be here as a representative from the Secretary's office. Look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Jennifer. We're excited to have you join. Michelle Parlos from the State Comptroller.
Yep, I'm here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Michelle. And then I don't believe he's here. Alfredo Herrera is a Geographic Information Officer. He was out unexpectedly for a family emergency, and I don't think is in the meeting unless he is and wants to say so. But he is our last ex officio member. And then to introduce myself again, I'm Scott Gall. I'm the Chief Data Officer and Chair of the Board here. And again, I just want to reiterate, appreciate everyone making time for this morning. We set up last year to have quarterly meetings for this group. I'm going to screen share in a second, so apologize while I fumble and talk at the same time. We set up to have quarterly meetings for this group last year. In the past, I think sometimes we've called the board together kind of when it's needed for something, but with the new state data plan, which this board saw and was submitted at a meeting in December. We want to make sure that we're keeping sort of regular track of the goals in that plan and whether we're making progress on the goals. And so this is the first quarterly meeting after we finalized the state data plan last year. So we're going to go briefly through to reiterate what the goals in the plan are, give a few quick updates on progress in those areas, and then hear from the members of the board any recommendations, advice to redirect or sort of improve our ability to make progress on those goals. So I'll pull the slides up in a second. We submitted the state data plan again, end of the last calendar year for the next 2-year cycle. And then this board also receives a report on or about January 15th that's developed in consultation with agency legal counsel and the Attorney General's office on legal issues in interagency data sharing, where there's some challenger issue with the way agencies can facilitate secure sharing of data across those agencies. So we do an annual review of whether there's really any changes to the law and any issues that this board needs to be apprised of and submit that to the board. It goes in January 15th. So that you received sometime in mid-January. Generally, there haven't been huge changes at the state level. The report does go in a little bit of detail about changes they made at the federal level to align the laws for health information and substance use data. So if you want to review that in the report, or we can discuss kind of at any time. But those are the 2 reports the board's received in the last quarter. And so we want to take a few minutes today to go through areas, reiterate the goals in the plan and where we're trying to make progress on those goals. So I will screen share so I remember where the screen is. And then we'll go through where we stand on some of the goals. Share. Okay. I can see a slide. Can everyone else see a slide on the screen, or at least one person?
Full visual, Scott.
Perfect. Thank you, Dad. All right, so we're going to go through. I'll cover this section, although much of this is work done by someone who's not here today. So our first goal in the state data plan, we have 6 goals in the plan. So we're just going to, again, kind of quickly go through each of these and cover some in a little bit more depth. But the first goal is increasing accessibility, visibility, transparency of data resources. We put a lot of time into surveying people who are state data users, whether they're staff in state agencies, people that are employed through nonprofits, through municipalities, policymakers. So we reached out pretty broadly and heard that it's not as easy as at least I might have thought to find and understand the data that the state has collected and what we're doing to make that accessible. So we're doing work under this goal to expand access to some of the tools, software, training materials related to state data, and to make it easier for folks to find and use that. So and then related goal, sorry, number 2 is improving the documentation we have about that data. So one thing is getting it out to the public. The second thing that goes hand in hand with that is making sure people understand the data, what's behind it, where it came from, what its limitations are. And so we're working on these goals sort of hand in hand together. And we had a nice milestone earlier this month in March when we marked Open Data Day, and we had a great event with state employees. And so Pauline Zaldonis is our open data coordinator, who's referenced in the slide here. She did a lot of work on this. She's out of the office today, so normally she would be telling you about this work, but I'm going to do it in her stead. So we did a few things to increase public outreach and increase agency understanding of some of the open data resources. We did an open data webinar with the Data Collaborative through Michelle Reardenold's help and her staff there. So we did a webinar where we were able to reach out to people that government doesn't sort of naturally get in touch with, talk about some of the open data resources. We've done similar webinars through UConn on some of the GIS data resources in the last quarter. So this is part of building on the effort of making sure that we're getting the word out there about the data that the state has and can make available to the public in ways you can access it. And we're hearing what people's questions and concerns are. So this was, we're very appreciative to the Data Collaborative for hosting this. And I think it was an event that worked well, and we got an audience that we don't always reach. The next thing we did was we had an Open Data Day event for agency staff. So Open Data Week is the first week in March, and every year there's some kind of celebration in the middle of that week for Open Data Day. It's an International Open Data Day. So we did an event last year for state agency staff to talk about some of the open data efforts in the state, make sure that they're aware of it, make sure that they have an opportunity to present and share their work. And we did the same thing again this March with state agency staff. We decided to design this really just for state agency staff so that there's a way that they can talk and learn from each other easily. We had a little over 100 people attend the event, which is frankly much more than we expected. And it was really great to see participation from a wide range of agencies. We had presentations from some of the folks on this board or other agencies. We had a wonderful training in the afternoon from the state library staff on records management that went to agency data officers so they could understand the rules and requirements for maintaining digital and paper records. And so we tried to structure a whole day where we're talking about this with agencies. We can share some of the slides and materials, and there's a very nice review document that Pauline pulled together that goes through all the open data efforts in the last year. So we'll get that to the board after this. But this is an important step, I think, for us to be able to talk about the open data resources, share some of the tools that are out there with agency staff, and try and make sure that we're encouraging use of these resources from agencies so that data gets out to the public. Next, there's a picture of the event. It's at 470 Capitol. You can see Rachel to my left on the right side of the picture. And many of your favorite state agency peers are here. Next, I'm going to highlight one thing in the agenda. This is the agenda. This is what we talked about during the day. We had, again, lightning talks on the upper right are featuring agency work. So again, the state library was there. Michelle from the comptroller's office presented on the Open Connecticut resources. We had our GIS office under Alfredo presenting a few different topics. So this is kind of what we're trying to talk about during the day. It went, I think, well. What you'll see kind of in a couple of the presentations from the vendors, we had the vendors who support the open data and geodata portal present. And the one thing that we highlighted there that I want to pull out for the board is they both talked about new tools to use artificial intelligence to help make it easier to navigate the portal. So both the open and geodata portals have different sort of versions of artificial intelligence tools where you can do querying. You can ask it a question, say, what was the graduation rate in Connecticut high schools, or how many, where are there the trees in Hartford? And so you can query a portal like that and get your questions answered sort of more dynamically than you can currently. You don't have to download files or go through a lot of work to pull together and analyze the data. So they both demonstrated tools that are working and used in other jurisdictions that make the portals a little easier to navigate We haven't implemented those here locally, but to me, those are areas in which I think if we can explore the tools for artificial intelligence, it helps with the navigation and making those resources a little easier to use for a wider range of people. So that's the thing on the Open Data Day agenda that we want to pull out for the board to indicate, I think we're working on. The goals, as everybody, I think in that meeting reiterated, for the artificial intelligence tools to work properly, you need good metadata. And so we have to document fully all of the different resources that are there. And so Pauline worked with agencies over the past year or two to do an audit of metadata. So we filled in missing metadata and gotten it mostly complete at this point. But there's more work that we can do to improve that, as we heard through the user surveys last year. So that covers, I think, most of the things for goal 1 and 2 on open data. And again, Pauline's the open data coordinator. She led a lot of this. It took an effort from a lot of different people. And so you see that reflected in the agenda to pull this together. And we'll send the year in review after this meeting that gives you a little more detail on some of the nuts and bolts for what's happened with open data in the last year. I'm going to, in a moment, flip to Rachel Leventhal-Weiner, who will introduce herself to my left to talk about training and resource needs for agency staff. I want to pause briefly if there's any questions, comments, recommendations, suggestions for the sort of first 2 goals here that are really about improving transparency and the use of open data resources from the members of the board. Seeing, oh, we have a hand. Okay, Thad.
Sure. So thanks, Scott. And really just more of a comment. I know you've attended the Open Data Collaborative event as well earlier this year, and just want to say that it's great to see the steps that the state is taking to really promote data usage education and working towards these goals. So I think it's these first 2 goals very clearly met and continue to be met by the efforts that have been undertaken. So well done.
Well, thank you, Thad. Thank you to the Data Collaborator for inviting us to those events. And I will say to the other members of the board, if there's other opportunities you see for outreach to kind of get the word out, again, that's something I think we underestimated the importance of and the need for in the past. And so the first 2 goals in the report are ways in which we're trying to say, okay, we need to do a little more to get the word out about some of the resources that are out there and make sure that we're hearing the challenges that users face working with state data. Next, I'm going to transition to Rachel, who will talk about some of the things that we're looking at for goal 3 here. This goal is really about identifying training resource for agency staff. So making sure that we're building capacity within state agencies to use data, understand what data says, how we're collecting it, all of those elements of the data lifecycle. First step is conducting a needs assessment, which we have made some progress on and can report out on to the board today.
This one. Thanks, Scott. For those I haven't met, my name is Rachel Leventhal-Weiner. I lead research and evaluation on the data and policy analytics team at OPM. So you're going to advance the slides, right? So we can figure it out. So the third goal of the state data plan is to really think about the capacity building that's needed for our state agency colleagues so that they can be prepared to both access things on the open data portal, but really leverage the power of what they collect within state agencies. So we issued a survey, and the survey went to a small subset of folks inside of state government agency data officers, some of our power users who've attended capacity building in the past. So far, we have about a little under 60 respondents, and we've listed some of the top agencies here. So we're really interested in accessing opinions about what's available to you within your agency, what other resources have you tapped into within state service, like what other training and capacity building have you had access to, and what have you done outside of the state to grow and build your skills. And Scott's going to talk a little bit later in the data plan about some of the challenges that we have around the roles and different sort of career paths that people have when they work in either research or data or some kind of analytical role. On the right, you can see that the range of roles and career levels for our respondents was quite vast. So just because you're doing research doesn't mean you're in a research analyst role, and modernizing some of the job descriptions and making sure that the expectations and sort of minimum skills that are available to folks are even across jobs. One of the things we've been looking at is sort of what kind of jobs are people in. So for those who responded to the survey, the range was very new employees, new folks to very experienced folks, but on average, we had folks with a little more between 7 and 8 years of experience. And the majority of folks who responded to the survey are folks who are using data in their everyday work. So on the daily, they're really accessing data, using data in some part of their job. But many of these folks haven't had any training that's been offered by their agency on data. So they may have participated in an external training, but their agency hasn't done training for them internally. And I should just pause and say that our team, the Data and Policy Analytics team, has offered a number of capacity building opportunities for colleagues in state service. So we've run those through the Evaluation and Impact American Rescue Plan funding. The GIS team has offered them. Our Open Data Coordinator has offered training opportunities, and we try and leverage and connect to any others that are happening within state service, but we're just seeing a need for perhaps more streamlined or coordinated training that really connects folks to the kinds of skills they need to build and puts them on a path to building those skills strategically. So about half of our respondents said that their agency doesn't that has funding for data training, but fewer of them say that their agency has their own internal data training team. So often it emerges that there's one expert who might lead trainings, but not many agencies have someone within the agency that's doing this work on behalf of the agency. So we were trying to figure out, well, how much could folks dedicate really to doing this kind of learning? So, a little under half say that they really have less than 2 hours per month to spend on learning. So if we were going to think about designing opportunities, we'd have to think a little bit about how can we tap into folks in either short bursts of training or maybe one extended opportunity. And folks really, I think in this virtual hybrid meeting space, people prefer a combination of online and in-person learning. So we really also have to work with what folks prefer in terms of what they'll engage with when we start to design some more content. In terms of what people want to learn, and this is something I've been running this kind of work for a while now, it's very common for folks to say that they're very interested in learning about data visualization tools and analytic tools. Further down on the list, but still making the top 5 are things like data storytelling and data management and governance. On our team, a combination of all of these things really, like great data visualization, as Scott said, or great AI comes from great metadata, great governance. So there's probably a combination of these kinds of topics that we'd want to design together. And then we asked folks what were their top strategic data priorities. And so you can see that there's a range here, but the top is really using data to inform policymaking and management, which to us is a real win. And we want to support folks developing their capacity in order to be able to meet that goal. But communicating the value of data that they have, building on evidence-based decision-making, building that evidence-based decision-making culture, those are all really important values as well. So folks, we asked them what kinds of resources they would need to support their training goals. And so, one of the things that we found was that shared training resources actually kind of takes, makes the pool of the pool of people planning smaller, but it expands the availability to many more attendees. So we have some resources at the state like LinkedIn Learning, and some agencies have a learning management system, but we're trying to balance what could we design or offer or leverage either internally or from a vendor that could actually help folks build their skills. Folks need time. They just reported that they could, maybe spend 2 hours a month. So time to actually build their skills would be a great value to them, and funding if the training did come at a cost. We're working with the data analytic tools is an interesting one because we're working towards really trying to use open tools where we can as a state, but different agencies have different sort of affinities towards the tools that they use. So the availability of things like professional workshops, conferences, or expert guidance, those are also things that we're working towards trying to figure out, are there best practices or resources that we can put together so that folks can access those on their own, and then seek out, people on our team or other folks in state service as also experts available to them. And then the last thing that they need to support their training goals is staffing. And this is just a general challenge, I think, in state service. Adequate staffing levels are really challenging, and adequate staffing levels to do the kind of things like research and data folks do is often kind of sort of unevenly distributed across agencies. A few other just insights from the respondents. So, we said earlier that people said maybe they had 2 hours or less. Some people like hybrid, some people like to be in person, some people like self-guided resources. So trying to figure out how to get people to easily access training opportunities. Small digestible chunks is one person's way of thinking about it, but maybe another person might want some really deep thinking. So we like the idea that this one respondent suggested about pre and post tests. And we've been in conversation with other states doing this work and just learned about another state that is designing kind of a pre-assessment to figure out where folks really should go to start their training. So rather than letting folks choose, offering them saying, oh, you're sort of in a novice area or you're in an intermediate area, and we would design things to kind of match people with where their skills are. I think the one challenge in doing this work that's highlighted in the third comment is that use cases are really hard to design, like super relatable to state work. So that's something that we really want to think about in terms of making it really relatable so that folks can do a training and then apply the skills right away. And, one challenge is that sometimes when training is seen as both an opportunity for folks, but maybe a threat. So you get all this training and maybe you take the training elsewhere. So we want to think about how we can just make teams that are constantly learning or provide opportunities for folks to be constantly learning. And so that's where we are with the needs assessment for now. Our next step is really to reach out to other states doing this work, just to understand how some of our findings kind of sit with work, and also dig into some of the sort of qualitative responses that we got on our needs assessment survey, just to figure out where we can really customize and start to fine tune. And our hope is that soon, probably at the next meeting, we can bring back a sort of a first draft of offerings or a strategy around how we're going to deal with some of the initial capacity building needs. So that is where we are right now, and we're happy to take questions.
Is there a space for us to offer any recommendations for resources? Should we email you? Is that where you are in the process right now? Or how should we be thinking about that?
Yeah, Adler, that'd be great. If you have ideas or thoughts, we've done a scan of different capacity building options, opportunities, companies, vendors, the way that other states and municipalities are doing this. And we've had some in-depth conversations with state of Maryland and Texas, and we're going to schedule a few others with some states we know that do this well. But there's I think there's a fine line between making it very sort of strict and bureaucratized and also making it open and available. And so, would there be a credential associated? Some states do a badging kind of system. So we're thinking through what the options would be. But if you have something that you're aware of and you think we should be aware of too, please send it our way.
Yeah, sure. I mean, any number of things from like for our, Swirl, which is a really fantastic self-contained system, but also a little bit closer than the states that you listed, NYU's Center of Urban Science and Progress. All bias included, that's my alma mater. They have an entire data system or a data course that's designed for administrative data. That's where I got my master's degrees, specifically for administrative data. So happy to connect you with those folks if they are continuing to do what I know of probably 2 or 3 years ago, which was doing some data analytics specifically for state and municipal employees and staff.
Oh, that sounds great. Thanks for highlighting those. I should just note that we ran a number of capacity building workshops, which we came to talk to this board about a year ago. So through efforts that I was leading with the American Rescue Plan, we ran a number of workshops in 2023 and 2024. My GIS colleagues are running training opportunities like sort of continuously and constantly. And then most recently, we've convened in our users group that we convene anywhere from 50 to I would say 75 people monthly since this past August. We have a pretty robust user community at DPH that have been contributing demos. So we put together quite the library of use cases and experiences, and it's starting to draw in folks who are novice users, who are advanced users. And that's a really great model of experts within the state who are really willing to work with novice users on a particular tool or idea. And so that's good for a tool, but maybe not for a particular skill that you use the tool to do. So we're just kind of working through those things, but any and all resources, send them our way.
That.
Thanks, Scott. So first of all, I want to applaud the R training that you mentioned. I know that there are several members of the Department of Transportation that I work with who take the R training meetings when you offer them. I think the one thing that I want to kind of point out from the findings that we saw in the survey was that, less than 2 hours a month for training. If there's a way that we can kind of maximize that less than 2 hours, because I'm sure that, the data knowledge is not the only thing, not the only tools that folks are trying to learn in those 2 hours per month. But one thing that comes to mind is the emails that we get from the Bureau of Information Technology Services, or BITS. They send out those emails kind of on a regular cycle. And the lessons range anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes. But those I find are really, really effective in teaching cybersecurity and email security and those things. And maybe perhaps thinking of something similar in the sense that an email that folks get, that maybe give them a link to a little 5 or 10 or at most 15-minute little lesson that they can go and watch or take part in and learn something. And then it ends with 2 or 3 questions about what did you learn today. I really think a platform like that and an approach like that would really be effective, and just something to think about.
That's a helpful one. We did something similar for Open Data Day where we made little screencasts. That's a good suggestion. We can take that back to the team.
I'm just going to piggyback and say that I think that's an excellent suggestion, as I'm just reminding managers of those little security trainings, and they're super quick. You can do them in a couple minutes. I think trying to get broad training agency-wide has been, there's a number of issues that I'm working on in that area right now, and it's super challenging. I also know that the constitutional offices don't have access to LinkedIn Learning, as I understand, and I'm digging more into why that is, but just wanted to second that suggestion of making it accessible in bite-sized chunks to employees.
Excuse me, that is helpful to know. And then we'll, again, like we said earlier, we'll send the open data year in review, which I believe includes links to the screencasts in it. If not, we can do that afterwards. And I think that's not the same thing, but it's on the model that both that and you were talking about, Jennifer. That covers goal 3 rather. I want to take 1 second also to thank Philip Asenyi's fellow that we had through the governor's office, who did a lot of the work on the needs assessment. He did the survey with the agencies, the scan of other states that Rachel referenced. His fellowship ended last Friday, so he cannot present today at this meeting, but he did a lot of work on this to help understand what other states are doing and what we have needs for within our own state. So we appreciate Philip's work, and it lives on after his fellowship through this board. I'm going to go quickly through the next 2 goals, and then we can spend, there's a lot of hand gesturing. We can spend a little more time on them at the next board meeting, which is in June. And that's partly because these are, there's some complexity with these, and so we've gotten a little less work off the ground. The 4th goal in the plan is looking at job classifications for data and analytics roles. This sort of directly builds on the training and capacity building work. So one thing is sort of skilling up staff within the state in a broad way. I think the other thing is making sure when somebody has data and analytics as part of their core job responsibilities, that we've got sort of the right kinds of language in the job classifications, a career pathway where they can see a future for themselves, and that we can attract and retain skilled data professionals in state employment. And so one of the goals we have here is to dig into this. We've talked with the agencies about setting up a working group across agencies to make sure we understand the day-to-day challenges that people face in attracting and retaining skilled staff. I pulled out a slide. This is first off a terrible chart that I made, but it'll do the job. This is a slide that's from the survey that Rachel just walked through the results of, which illustrates kind of the issue here. So we had, as she'd said, 56 respondents to the survey as of the end of last week. You can see these are the job classes that had the highest frequency in the data set. So manager, research analyst, roles, education consultant. This is through Department of Education. There's a few data scientists, a few epidemiologists. These are roles that you would expect for the most part. These are people that are using data day to day in their job one way or another. So those are the most frequent. The other jobs, there's 30 other job classes that we had in the state. And then, like Rachel had said, this went out to a fairly small group of people who are the agency data officers, people who regularly participate in some of the training activities, or either whether it's through the R group or GIS group. And so there's 30 other job classes in the state that have a single person in them who responded to this. And sometimes that's a person who does not, use data or analytics in their day-to-day job. But a lot of times it's somebody who really, it's a core responsibility. And so they're spread across kind of dozens of different job classifications in the state. So that really, that kind of creates challenges for attracting and retaining people when you're hiring people into something that doesn't sound like this is the right job, or there's sort of a career pathway that's not obvious, that that's the core skill set. So I think that's sort of what we're working with at the start. And what we're going to do to sort of take action on this is work with a core group across agencies, working with our state HR folks as well, to make sure that we've got a sense of where we can make some ground on the way in which the state, again, attracts and retains people with data and analytics skills. Again, part of which is making sure they've got resources to skill up in those roles. But this goal is really focused on the roles themselves. So we haven't done as much on this, so we'll kind of be brief about it. But just so you know, this is sort of the starting point, and the survey is a good illustration of the challenge there. Some people are in roles where it's clear that's the responsibility, but many people who are using data day to day have something else in their job description. The next goal, again, I'll go quickly through this. I think by June, we'll have some nice results to share with people that are a little more fully baked. But this goal is focused on improving basically the ability for agencies and an enterprise scale to share data with each other, making sure that we've got clear guidelines for secure, safe, ethical, secure sharing of data across agencies. There's a real interest in sharing data, but also making sure that we've got the guardrails in place to do that successfully. And then to take a successful framework like we have through P21, which is our state longitudinal data system that works with 15 executive branch agencies, and to make sure that we can use the framework for that, the lessons learned from that, to build that out and work more across agencies. So the things that we're doing right now, which I don't have in the slides, but I'll kind of talk through, what we'll hopefully be able to report on by June is progress developing a secure data enclave, where we can manage the data a little more securely across agencies. That's a critical piece of the infrastructure to enable us to do this. So we've got some work that got off the ground in the last couple of months, and we should have more to report on by June on that. So we're working on developing secure data enclave for that. And we've done work that I don't have in the slides, but we just presented earlier in the week to look at the way in which we talk about and message about our state longitudinal data system, P21, to make sure that we're talking about it more like a service and less like a system, less like software, and more like a way in which that we can provide services to state agencies to safely, ethically, securely share data, link data across those agencies to develop insights and produce interesting analysis that helps people learn about the way in which state programs are impacting the residents of Connecticut. So we should be able to talk about that a little more later this year. A nice milestone as part of the demonstration that we can do this successfully and generate useful insights as we release the report on disconnected youth, which is the second report in that series last month with support from Dalio Foundation to the Boston Consulting Group. So we're grateful to that support to help get that report out the door, but that pulled data from 10 different agencies together, was able to draw a lot of insights from integrating that data, again, safely, ethically, and securely. And so that's a nice example of that There's many other settings in which you can sort of hear about that report in more detail, but we can send a copy of it out to the board members. And again, it's a good demonstration of the capabilities that are there. We want to make sure we're building on that so that it can be a little more responsive, and that we can do this kind of in an enterprise approach. So June, I think the next meeting we should have a little more to report on in that area for both goals 4 and 5 here. I will pause if there's any comments, questions from anyone on those. Then we'll move to goal 6, and then the last thing on the agenda is to just hear if there's focus areas, topics that the board wants us to cover later in the year in the subsequent meeting. So I know there's interest in that last time we met, and just to make sure we're giving space if there's recommendations from the board to focus on new areas in the future. Anything on goals 4 or 5 from the board members? Seeing and hearing nothing.
Oh, one quick question on goal 5. For the example that you raised, the report that OPM just released, have you folks been able to talk to other states about work that they may be doing in harnessing their state longitudinal data systems, similar to what that report was able to produce?
Yeah, I can say, and I'll bump part of this to Rachel because she did this. So 2 things I'd say. We have many opportunities to talk with other states about their longitudinal or integrated data systems. There was a best practices conference through Department of Education in January, a month ago, recently with other states. So we're learning literally best practices from them. There's a couple of other events or convenings coming up in March and April and May with other states. We're learning from that, and we're part of, I think, a handful of kind of communities of practice with other states. The other thing we've learned from them, I think, is that there really isn't another state that has looked at disconnected youth in this way or in this depth. And so Rachel did the presentation on disconnected youth at the Best Practices Conference. So I think she can talk to that at a little more detail. There's a group through the National Youth Employment Coalition, Adler, which I know you've presented with. And so we've participated with them to hear about, other frameworks for that. And I think there's some areas that's similar, but I will say, I think what Connecticut's done is a little broader in scope and probably more ambitious than what we've seen from other states. But there's good avenues for communication with our peer states, as I'm sure everybody is aware. Some of the changes at the federal level have impacted this work. And so the staff that put together the best practices conference a month and a half ago are no longer there at the Department of Education. So it's sort of unclear what the long-term support for some of these efforts will be from the federal level. But it's been critical to get them off the ground at a state level. So we're just hoping we can sustain that out in the future. I will bump to Rachel for anything you want to add from the best practices conference from talking about that report with other states.
There's sort of 2 things that stick out to me from the presentation. Like Scott said, other states aren't looking at that particular topic or population, mostly because their integrated data systems are either focused on workforce or education, like more exclusively. And that's part of the reason for that is because the federal granting comes from the Department of Education. So it's meant to sort of make these preschool through 20 or workforce systems. Ours is unique because we've expanded the table and now include more health and human services and judicial organizations. So I think the topic was exciting to the folks. It was a lightly attended session, but it was okay because it was our first time really presenting on it. We have some upcoming conversations with Office of Early Childhood and Campaign for Working Connecticut. So we'll get some more feedback on that work. But one other limiting factor or opportunity is the development of the secure enclave. I think will facilitate and ease the kind of the actual doing of the work, the data transferring, matching, merging. The secure enclave will enable us to do that more smoothly. There's just many moving pieces. And so some of the modernization efforts will make projects like that smoother in the future. And the project itself is getting a lot of attention in the legislative session. Folks are starting to see that there's real value in looking at both agency data on one topic in one agency, but also connecting it to another agency to kind of answer big questions. So we're happy for that work. Like Scott said, like the Department of Education is in a state of flux right now. So I don't know if that answers to what you were thinking, Scott. Great.
All right. Anything else? Goals 4 or 5. We'll move briefly to goal 6, and then other topics from the board. All right. Goal 6. as always, we must talk about artificial intelligence in all meetings. And so goal 6 is on supporting the responsible use of artificial intelligence, AI, in state government. Just to reiterate for the board members in case um, the refresher is helpful, the state was required to develop a policy framework for use of AI by state agencies last year. So OPM, in collaboration with Department of Administrative Services and all the executive branch agencies, issued a responsible AI framework in February of last year that goes through the policies and procedures for use of AI by state agencies. That's really focused on the use in any kind of software or technology application, whether it's something that's from an external vendor resource or whether it's something that's internally driven. It's certainly possible that agencies will develop sort of their own AI solutions or something with some kind of complicated algorithmic methods behind it. So we developed the responsible AI framework that was issued last year. Again, through OPM DAS, applies to all executive branch agencies and sort of any use of AI. The piece that we carved out for the state data plan is making sure that our data is kind of up to the task going forward, and that our governance processes for making data accessible for AI tools are also up to the task, that we're not sort of in a garbage in, garbage out environment where we're giving data that gives misleading conclusions when it's fed into some kind of complex system, that we know what's happening with state data if it's used or exposed to some kind of AI solution, that we can understand if there's sort of a misleading result or interpretation, that we're protecting the privacy of individuals, businesses, property owners, everybody else that sort of contributes data to the state. So we want to sort of balance making sure that we're able to make effective use of the new tools with providing the protections to the data that the state collects through having a kind of robust framework for governance. So that's the goal in the state data plan, is to really focus on the data aspects of using AI responsibly. Next slide. There's a few things. I'm just going to kind of cover these at a high level. That there's not a ton of visuals to go with this. But these are things that we've worked on in the last quarter to support the responsible use of AI, kind of consistent with the goals in the plan. There's a legislative proposal from one of the governor's proposals at Senate Bill 1249 that does several other things related to use of AI by the state. But one of the goals that's in the state data plan is to create policies for data quality and data governance so that we can, again, support the responsible use of AI. So that's captured in that proposal as one of the sections, and make sure that all of the agency data officers review and are consulted with in the process of identifying data sets that could be used for AI, that those data sets are curated, scrubbed appropriately. Again, all the privacy protections are in place. And so the things that are, I think, baked into the state data plan are now in the legislative proposal. And if that sort of makes it through the legislative session, then there'll be law, and it'll be in state statute that we have to create policies for data quality and data governance to support the use of AI. So again, the concepts that are in the state data plan that you saw in December are now in legislation. And if, again, that passes, there'll be law later this year. And we'll really focus on developing these policies for data quality and data governance for responsible use of AI. I'm going to skip to 3 and 4 here really quickly. So in advance of that, we are working on making sure we've got good frameworks in place for data quality and data governance. We focused a lot on both of these topics, again, through P20WIN, our state longitudinal data system, because it's a particularly complex case where we're sharing data across multiple agencies that has a lot of concerns for confidentiality, privacy of individuals. And so the bar is much higher for that. So the data governing board for that group approved a few weeks ago a data quality policy. So that's the first step. So we have a policy framework for data quality that we can use with the 15 agencies that participate there. They all agreed to it. And so that's, I think, a good way to build that out and make that into sort of an enterprise policy. So we have a foothold for data quality through that process, and have started working with those agencies on how to actually implement that, the procedures and policies that kind of go with, procedures that go with implementing the policy framework. So we passed a policy for 15 agencies to look at data quality for interagency data sharing. It doesn't apply to all their operations, but that's a step in this direction, I think, of supporting the AI framework here. The agency data officers are named in the legislation, Senate Bill 1249, as sort of the the framework through which we're making sure that there's consultation and review about the use of data for AI. And so we've started last year and are continuing this year, making sure we've got quarterly kind of meetings with the agency data officers on the calendar in the same way we're doing with the data board, and that group is meeting and convening and developing a real kind of governance framework so that we can make decisions as a state carefully about the use of data through the agency data officers who are tasked sort of in statute with being the intermediaries for that with their agencies. So we're building out some of the elements for data quality and data governance using some of the existing resources that are there. And again, if these pieces move forward, and if they don't, we'll still keep doing this. But one way or the other, we need to really focus on quality of data and data governance to make effective use of data for AI. So that's where I think you're seeing some efforts in the near term. We had a nice opportunity, item number 2 here, to work with UConn for their PSELC, which is Public Sector Executive Leadership, something collaborative, thank you, where they bring training to folks in the public sector, whether they're from the state or municipalities or different branches of government. And so we had a good training with them on responsible use of AI that had a packed room earlier this month with Department of Administrative Services, folks from our team to focus on the use of AI. And there's just really a lot of questions that came out of that about making sure that we're making responsible use for it. I know some of the members of the board were fortunate or unfortunate enough to attend that meeting. We appreciate the attention to that. But again, we're trying to make some progress in the development of policies and procedures specific to the use of data for AI, kind of in parallel to the continued implementation of the state's responsible AI framework that was put forward last year. And that is it on AI. Any questions, comments on this goal 6? So we'll again have a little more, I think, next session to dig into this in more depth. That you have a hand up.
Yeah, Greg, sorry. So Scott, as a member of the AI advisory board as well, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't kind of at least vocalize some of the things that we talked about at our last quarterly meeting, or our last monthly meeting rather, with regards to the use of AI within state organizations. There's definitely a lot here, and I think that this the AI topic itself, at least for this board and organization, probably requires or justifies a meeting on its own to kind of delve into a little more with, as you talked about, data quality and things like that, and governance with regards to preparing for AI usage. I know for a fact that AI is already in use in a lot of groups within the state umbrella. And so it's one of these where we might be a little bit behind the wave on this, and so I think that that we may want to look at doing maybe even a special meeting on AI for this organization, if it's possible, just to look at the implications and use of AI with regards to just those 2 things, data quality and data governance. I think it's really important at this point to have these discussions, and if this SB 1249 does become law, to really look at its implementation and the impacts that it would have on state organizations.
Thank you, Thad. I totally agree. I would welcome the opportunity to participate in that meeting and also to learn more about the AI data governance team.
Great. Anyone else? On goal 6. That gives us a wonderful segue into the next and last topic on the agenda and potentially to our next meeting. I'm going to stop screen sharing. The last thing we put on the agenda, really just sort of a placeholder to ensure we make time for this. At the last meeting we had in December, there was some discussion about trying to figure out, can we have a topic or topics that the board takes on sort of more intentionally to focus on some issue area or some specific topic, potentially AI is that topic. But I just want to make a minute to see if there's discussion or further thoughts from the members of the board on something that you want to make sure that we're attending to or hear about or bring up in a future discussion. If there's any of the topics that came up in December that you want to focus on in the remainder of 2025. I will. I'll see if there's anyone that has additional thoughts on that. And again, you are always welcome to sort of reach out offline separately. Our next meeting will be in June. but we want to get ahead of that if there's something folks want to make sure that we're focusing on. Hearing nothing, seeing no raised hands. Then again, we'll take, I think, to heart the last couple of comments on having a deeper focus on AI, probably that, and I think we'll have some things again to report on the enterprise data sharing in June. So those will probably be little meatier topics for the June meeting. If there's anything that comes up in the interim that you want to dig into in more detail, please do not hesitate to reach out. We'll send the slides, some follow-up materials, or they'll be posted to the GA site. I think both will be true at some point after this meeting. And again, thank you to everybody for making time for this today and attending. And particularly to those of you that are here in person, thank you for making the trip in. Although if it's relatively short for some of you. But that concludes today's meeting. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Be good.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Wonderful.